Yeah. You guys can stop clapping. I'm so sorry that you have to see me again. I swear this will be the last time I get on the stage this con. But good morning. Good morning. The individual that I'm going to bring up to the stage, I'm just going to tell you a little story about. I met John, I think 15 plus years ago. It was when Black Hat was still at Caesar's Palace. I have spent 23 years doing the network for Black Hat. I've interacted with hundreds and hundreds of trainers over that time, and different people just in our community, in our industry. John is the type of person who, at the end of a training day, you would find still in the classroom with the students. Everybody else at the conference had packed up, gone off to go do whatever there was to do in Vegas. And he would be sitting there with his students, or with a handful of students who maybe just weren't getting it. So spending the extra time going through the labs, making sure that by the time they were done, they were better at whatever it was that they were trying to learn. And one example of that stood out to me was, John, I think you'll remember this one. It had to be 10 plus years ago that Black Hat decided to do a Seattle standalone training. He's like, oh no. So a Seattle standalone training. So no briefings, just trainings. They go out, there's probably 10 training classes. They're like, we're going to give this a shot, see if this works. Well, it worked in a sense in that people registered and they were going to show up. But then there was this massive storm that came through, and flights were canceled all over the place. And it was ridiculous. It turned into a shit show, right? But one of the classes got hit harder than any other, and that was John's class. He had one student who was able to make it for the class, a single student. So we'd go and poke our heads in the rooms just to make sure network's working, everything's fine. And he's sitting side by side with this guy. And they're like, yeah, we're great. And then the next day we go in to check on the training class. I look in, nobody's there. I'm like, uh-oh, where's John? Where's the student? And we're like, I don't know where John is. Okay, well, I guess if the guy who was taking the class isn't there, it must be fine. And we kind of are confused about what's going on. And so just after the trainings, we reach out to the student, feedback wise and stuff. Hey, did everything go okay? You guys weren't in the class or whatever. And he was like, oh yeah, it was great. I got to spend one-on-one time with John Strand. We went through the entire coursework in one day. And so for the second day of training, he took me sightseeing in Seattle and took me drinking. And we're like, all right, that sounds like John Strand. So without further ado, one of the most selfless guys in InfoSec, John Strand.
Thanks, Matt. All right, so Paul Harvey's rest of the story while I get my computer set up. I found out from the event planner at that Seattle conference that there was a glitch. And what happened, the storm happened, of course, but they canceled my class 2 weeks before, and they realized they made a mistake, and then they reopened it. But the problem was automation went out to all of my students and told them that the class was canceled. And that one guy was a last minute registration as well. And I honestly, as much as you tell that story, I don't remember that day at all. I don't know what happened. I remember going to Seattle. I remember that distinctly. I remember day one. Day two's a little hazy. I think trains were involved. I'm not sure. So I've got a question. I asked the team over here earlier, who's protecting the cyber networks in the Seattle, or not Seattle, Salt Lake kind of greater area right now? I'm a little worried about, do you guys all just have amazing interns that are stuck at work right now? It's AI. Great. We're going to get to that, by the way. We're going to get to that here in just a little bit. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for having me out here. I greatly appreciate it. It's very cool. This is my first time in Provo. I've done some things in Salt Lake over the years, but it's great being down here. I had no idea it's like just this gorgeous in this town. So this is an amazing place that you all live. and get to hang out. And this is an awesome space for a conference. So the name of my presentation is Onions, Belts, and Fashion, which if this ever gets posted on YouTube is really going to help the YouTube analytics in driving people to this presentation and to this video. So it's basically my way of saying I'm old. If you're too young to get it, that's the point. I'm old. So there we go. I'm going to give you a disclaimer though. Some of the images in this presentation, I actually used AI to create them. And I think that that's important. Anytime you're generating or you're giving a presentation, I think it's incredibly important to be honest and upfront that you used AI to generate these things. Because I think a lot of people are using AI and they're not honest about it. And I am, but I wanted to share one of my prompts to give you an idea of the level of work that goes into me creating a presentation using AI. This is a prompt that I have for one of the pictures in my presentation. I would like a picture of a cow, overweight, smoking, drinking on a couch. It seems burnt out, has stubble, seems very tired. His life has not gone the way he wanted in love, in work, and personal growth. He has failed. Basically like the Homer Simpson's monkey Mojo sitting on the couch smoking and drinking, but a cow. And I'm going to tell you, it nailed it. So it's a little bit of foreshadowing. So what I do want to talk about is the stuff that we don't talk about. There's a bunch of stuff in computer security that has been building up over the past 10 years that is starting to really, really bother me. A lot of computer security is based on the stuff that we've been doing for over 15 years. So if you do training, for example, you're going to get trained on using and exploiting Active Directory. And I think that that's fine, right? You're going to get trained in exploitation of web apps. And I think that that's fine. But there's a whole universe of things we really aren't talking about. We aren't having good, intelligent conversations about these areas and these topics in computer security. And this presentation is designed that we can kind of get away from just talking about ransomware, right? Which is hitting people all over the place. But I almost look at ransomware as a magician, right? If I have a magician and they are showing you something shiny here in this hand, what hand should you be watching? The other one, right? So this gets into one of the things that really cracks me up. If I go to, other conferences and I see presentations, people like to boast about how dwell time has reduced, right? Like if you go back 10 years, they would say dwell time on average is a year for most organizations that get compromised. And now you go to some presentation like dwell time has been reduced to just like a week or two on average. I'm like, we shouldn't be bragging about that because that's ransomware. And we're adding in the time that like the hackers break into your network, encrypt everything and say, hey, I've locked you out of your network. And like, congratulations, everybody. We got dwell time down to less than 24 hours on this one. We shouldn't be proud of that, right? And then the other thing that's sucking up all the oxygen in the room, and I started kind of talking about this at the beginning, I'm going to come back to it a little bit later, is AI. AI is going to save us, right? I will get into some more stuff about artificial intelligence and training a little bit later, but I think that anybody that says that AI is absolutely going to save this industry does not understand artificial intelligence and further doesn't understand information security at all. I think that that's a really easy, quick thing to say. That doesn't mean it doesn't have impacts, right? If you look at the industry today, we always hear about, 700,000 jobs, a million jobs, 4.5 billion jobs open. I don't know what the number is because I think people pull it out of their ass. But if we're looking at most of the jobs that are hitting the market space right now, like the junior level analyst getting started jobs are all but gone. Because we have so many people in the industry that are in executive level decisions that have bought the hype for AI. And trust me, AI is important. I'm going to talk about that more a little bit later. But to look at it and say that it's going to replace huge amounts of people in computer security is just not true. And I'll get to that here in just a little bit as well. So we're not going to be talking about like some of the general things. The next slide is kind of a little bit in the face of that, but give me a moment when we get to it. But we're going to talk about things that are kind of under the surface and stuff I don't see talked about as much as I'd like to see them talked about. And to start, I'm going to start by talking about China. Now, whenever we're talking about China, I know people we talk about China all the time. We talk about Chinese hackers. We hear about, Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon and all these different things. And that's all true, right? But I think that we're missing some context. I think one of the things that we're absolutely missing is how much Xi Jinping looks like Winnie the Pooh. I think that is something that we need to discuss further. And just so you know, ChatGPT totally failed me because I was trying to get it to replace the Chinese text here with "Who wants honey" in Chinese, and it was having trouble with that, which also makes me feel a little uncomfortable because when I was like, "Hey, just replace this Chinese text with the Chinese text of "Who wants honey," and it just put a blue box and censored it and said, "How did I do?" I'm like, I think there's something going on in the background here. Yeah, GPT. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah, let me know if you want to adjust the font or the positioning of it. I'm like, it's a blue censorship box, ChatGPT. It doesn't say that because I do get into conversations with AI bots because I find it humorous. So I promise you there will be no math. And I know in a conference like this one, that's not an advantage. Like many of you are like, oh crap, there's no math? Was hanging out and listening to people talking about the CTF challenges, and I got excited. I was talking to Pope and Grifter before, and it's like, these are our people, right? These are our InfoSec people. These are the Uber geeks, and I really respect that. So while there may not be math, how about some history instead? I think that makes everyone like, wait, I got into IT, so I didn't have to talk about history. But I think that this is important. And once again, this is why I think this aspect of China is not discussed as much as it should be, but it should be discussed. And I want to go back to the Boxer Rebellion in China around the turn of the last century. You can even go a little bit before that, 1850s, whenever China and Japan went at each other the first time and China lost. And if you look at the Boxer Rebellion, it's absolutely horrific, right? If you look at the Boxer Rebellion, you have a whole bunch of people in China. They're like, well, we don't want foreign influence in our country. We're sick and tired of being force-fed opium. We're going to kick out foreigners. And roughly 8 countries got together and said, wait, you're not going to buy opium anymore. No, we're going to force you to keep that open. And they invaded, and you got the Princess Dowager and all of that in history. But the point is, the Chinese lost. And it was weird because the way that they lost, there's many people in the historical like Chinese area that believe that if they would have continued fighting, they would have won. But the 8 countries basically took over Beijing and they forced a surrender. And the beginning of what is called a century of humiliation began for China. And this isn't something I'm making up, okay? I'm not ripping on China. I'm not pro-China, not anti-China. This is just history at this point. This is what it is called. And if you Google that and you go to the Wikipedia article and you read it, it's just one horrific thing after another. An example, after the Boxer Rebellion, as part of the peace agreement with China surrendering, is they basically had to give money to the 8 countries that were offended that equaled the entirety of the GDP that China had per year. It took them up until, I want to say, right around 1940 for them to actually pay that off, almost 50 years. And then the people that were part of the Boxer Rebellion, the Boxers, by the way, it was called the Boxer Rebellion because they saw the type of martial arts that the Chinese did, and they said that's Chinese boxing. So that's why they called it the Boxer Rebellion. And they basically had in the agreement that the people that were the Boxers had to be killed. And they were killed publicly through some of the most horrific torture, murder devices that you can possibly come up with. By the way, you know, the UK is really creative in that area around the turn of the last century. And then you move from that, and when the Qin dynasty ended, and then you move into, let's just jump over a bunch of things, and let's go to World War II. World War II didn't go really well for the Chinese either. If you read a book if you're feeling sunshiny and happy, and you're like, no, this just can't happen. If you feel like you're dark and emo, I'm going to put you to the test. There's a book called The Rape of Nanking. Read that book and tell me how you feel at the end of that book. It's one of the most horrific things I have ever read in my entire life. And that was one major city. That wasn't the first time that Japan had done horrific things to China. But then we can move forward a little bit further. And after the war, a lot of people say the century of humiliation ends at the end of World War II. And that's not true. Many people in China disagree because in 1948, Mao Zedong got quite irate and he kicked old dictator Chiang out of the state of China. Chiang Kai-shek leaves China, not voluntarily, of course, and he takes a huge percentage of the art that China had, which he should have because they would have burned it, but he takes it to Taiwan, which further has the humiliation in this century of humiliation in China. And when we're talking about all of this, and by the way, it continues, right? Taiwan was part of it. Hong Kong was part of it. You have this century of humiliation. And in many countries, whenever they have that type of humiliation, you kind of gloss over it in books, and you're like, it was a bad couple of decades for China. That is not how China took it. Understand that before the end of the Qin dynasty, China considered itself to be the middle kingdom, the center of the universe. And they were proven wrong, horribly and brutally again and again and again and again. And one of the things that they learned after all of that, when we're talking about this century of humiliation, which by the way, many people in China now say it's a century and a half of humiliation, they still believe in some situations that this century, quote unquote, of humiliation will not end until they get Taiwan back, because they look at that as an overt example of their continued humiliation. All right. How does this actually apply to dealing with cyber today? Because this history matters. This history matters a lot. Because back in 2013, we had a communist scholar called Zheng Bijan, and I know I mispronounced that, and I apologize for that. In 2013, came up with this idea that China needed to become a cyber great power, all right? And Xi Jinping quickly picked up on that. And when China is looking at how they look at defense and offense moving forward, they look at three separate pillars, right? They look at dominance in air, dominance in naval. Naval is a huge part because if they look at their history, they saw just how badly they failed in the Boxer Rebellion and in World War II. And they realized that one of the things that they absolutely failed at is they did not have a navy. So that gave the enemy the opportunity to go anywhere, be anywhere, and they allowed the Japanese to identify where they were going to do their offenses, and China couldn't do much about it. So when they're looking forward, and this is all the way back in 2013, they said, what is it going to take for us to be a cyber great power? And for the record, that translation is ugly. It doesn't actually match what exactly China is going to do. If you actually look at the characters and the definition, it's not just, hey, we're a great cyber power. It actually means something. It means that they're the superior cyber power on the planet. Okay, and that is critical. But even all the way back in 2013, when they set up a 10-year plan, they didn't execute really well. And the reason why China didn't execute really well, going back to historical Qin dynasty and before, is China has a unified government, in air quotes, but it's usually a whole bunch of provinces and a whole bunch of generals, all kind of doing their own thing. So up until relatively recently, if you had Chinese offensive against other nation states like the United States cyber attacks, if you remember the old RSA attack from a long time ago, that was one small isolated group in China that was successful in breaching RSA. And that creates problems because you have a bunch of people all doing cyber offensive operations without an actual targeted goal and an objective of what it is they are trying to achieve. You have a whole bunch of people going in 400 different directions, overlapping, hacking each other. It was a mess. Now, as part of that, whenever they get to 2023, you could say that they failed, right? They had failed in actually meeting that specific objective. But then some other things happened, right? You could definitely pay lip service to, yeah, we're a cyber great power. All's good. Go to the main political people in China and say, yep, we're doing awesome. But then something happened that fundamentally changed their perception of all of the plans of becoming a cyber great power. And that was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Right before Russia invaded Ukraine, they launched the largest cyber offensive we have ever seen as part of that attack. And their goal and objective was to completely disrupt the power grid and the communication systems of Ukraine, so it was impossible for them to coordinate and deal with the Russian offensive appropriately. Now, when they launched that offensive, they had made a couple mistakes. One, they had been using Ukraine as a sandbox for cyber offensive operations for a large number of years. And in doing so, Ukraine kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And Western companies started flooding into Ukraine to help bolster the security of Ukraine, especially for critical infrastructure. So when Russia launches their attack, they do this huge cyber offensive operation and it fails. Limited successes, but overall, it was a strategic and tactical failure. And in doing that, it severely hampered the ground offensive. Now, there was a lot of other problems with the Russian military, which I don't want to get into, but China saw that. They saw how trying to do an invasion of a country without having cyber superiority doomed the actual offensive itself. Because you have to knock out comms. The United States does it a bit differently. We don't like to knock out comms. We like to get into the comms so we can track where the key players are and take them out instead. But that's a whole nother conversation I don't want to get into right now. But they saw what happened with Russia's failure, and everything changed last year. Now, whenever we're looking at cyber offensive operations and the way China is structuring everything, it is no longer scattered. They have now unified it under the PLA directly. They have direct leadership that are directly driving the cyber offensive operations of China. And they're doing it specifically based on the lessons that they learned from Russia and the history that they've been dealing with from the century of humiliation. They are no longer trying to play this game of just hack everything willy-nilly. It's very, very, very targeted, especially whenever you're looking at Salt Typhoon and then Volt Typhoon. They are trying to gain persistent access to critical infrastructure so that they can cripple their adversaries if they ever get into an actual kinetic war situation. So this is just the beginning. So whenever I talk about China, I know we all talk about China, I don't think that people are having conversations about China the right way. They aren't having conversations from a deep, deep historical context of what is driving their absolute drive for cyber superiority. And they're not having a conversation about how China is going to be targeting us, and not just us, but other countries, and they're trying to dwell. They're not going to be doing the whole, we're just going to gain access and do ransomware thing. They want to dwell specifically from the perspective of putting in kill switches into critical infrastructure at the opportune time when they can do it. They are hyper-focused. The other thing that we've seen with China, I know Jeff was here yesterday. Do you guys, anybody at DEF CON remember Sexy Pandas at the DEF CON CTFs? Those guys were like good. They were really good. Do you notice China doesn't send people to DEF CON CTF anymore? They're keeping their talent in-house. They're doing their own challenges. They're doing their own CTFs, much like DEF CON CTF, where they're trying to find the absolute best and brightest in China, and they don't want them to do any of that externally anymore. So there's a whole bunch of other things we could talk about. We could talk about the partnership of China and private industry and like private pen testing firms. We could talk about how their education pipeline works. But the point is, you all have to understand China is upping their game, and they have a lot of hackers, and they are now in a point where they're very targeted, they're very focused, and they are very well managed. So all of this stuff that if you want to read it, you just start Googling Century of Humiliation, China as a cyber great power. And a lot of the stuff that I talked about is from direct PLA documents where they talk directly about what it is they are planning on doing and how they're going to do it. And it's all available online. You can download it. It's leaked and it's all available for free and it's all translated in English. What they're going to do is clear, it's documented, and they're executing it. So that's something I just don't think that we're talking about. And kind of building off of this China thing, I don't think we really talk about real nation state attack vectors. I did cyber offensive operations for the United States government for a number of years. I still have a clearance and I still do some things, but not nearly as much as I used to. But whenever we were doing cyber offensive operations, it was very, very similar to the way that the people in this room would be trained to do offensive operations right now if you went to a training class, right? We're going to attack, we're going to do spear phishing, we're going to do web apps, maybe we're going to do some cloud stuff, but it's very, very similar to the attack tactics that we were doing a decade ago. However, if you sit down and you start having a conversation with people that are actually doing cyber offensive operations, they aren't necessarily doing the same type of attack methodology that you would get trained at in an offensive class today, in most offensive classes today. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and I want to talk about those here just a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about is the NSO group, right? Many people, when they talk about the NSO group, they discuss the NSO group specifically around Pegasus, the malware that is deployed on people's phones, right? You had a lot of reporters, you had a lot of people in the industry, you had a lot of other foreign nationals that ended up getting killed over this, but they have the ability to put malware on a phone and so much focus. EFF did a great write-up on this, talking about what was the malware that was on the phone. A whole bunch of other people have done some great write-ups, but I gotta be honest, I don't care about the malware. I honestly don't. If you look at a lot of malware is, it has the capability of running commands directly on the device. Okay, I would expect that. Has the ability to communicate over a covert C2 channel. Okay, I would expect that. What I'm interested in is how did it get there? How did that malware actually get there? And that is what is powerful from the NSO group. And this is something that, once again, people do not talk about. So a weird thing happened a number of years ago, right around COVID. I got this call from somebody that was a friend, more of an acquaintance that I'd kind of talked at cons with a couple of times. And he said, the United States government has banned NSO from selling to the United States government. But here's the problem. The United States government wants that sweet, sweet NSO group software. So we need to find a way to get the NSO software into the United States for classified operations, law enforcement operations. And we want to create a shell corporation to do this. And at this point, I didn't know the name of the shell corporation. I had no idea what they were actually going to do, but they wanted to fly me out to Israel, and they wanted me to spend a couple of days with NSO to see what they had. I had some conversations with my family, had some conversations with some other people, and I turned it down. I was like, this is really skeevy. If the government has banned NSO, I think that there's really good reasons for it because of the way that they've been selling their software to literally everybody around the world. And I don't want to be part of that, right? But the stuff that I was given and the stuff that was talked about with me was very much terrifying. One of the biggest things that NSO Group has the capability of doing is malvertisements, where they can deliver zero-click malware in the form of advertisements in a highly targeted fashion through ad delivery networks. Like they could draw a rectangle or a square or an irregular shape around a specific location, set up an ad profile for the type of person that they would be going after in that particular organization, set the devices that they want to go after, and literally NSO Group would go through advertising networks and they would drop that malware on those devices with almost 100% accuracy in doing that. And this bothered me, right? This bothered me for a couple of reasons. One, I had questions like, how are they doing this through ad networks? Like, is there a payoff, something happening? Like, are they just coming up with a variety of zero days to bypass these ad network security checks? Like, how are they doing that? I never got that answered. But the other question that I had with all of this is, how do we test that? See, and there's the problem. Many of your organizations are defending against attacks that we can test for. You hire a pen testing firm shows up, they do the standard scanning, or they do reconnaissance, they do scanning, they do exploitation, they do post-exploitation, lateral movement. They do the things that we always do, and then the organizations protect against those things. Josh Wright is another SANS instructor and a very good friend of mine, and he has this law. It's called Josh Wright's law. He said that organizations will not patch a vulnerability until a Metasploit exploit is made available. Think about that. We tend not to fix things unless the risk is directly apparent. So a number of you knew or had heard of Dan Kaminsky. You know Dan Kaminsky, right? Dan Kaminsky literally comes up with a vulnerability that he can take over any organization on the entire internet at will, easily. And he shares it with a handful of people in the industry. A handful of people, he shows it to us, and he's like, here's this thing. Is this bad? Yeah, that's bad, Dan. That's really bad. But he held it very, very close to the vest. He didn't want to share it because it was that dangerous. And he went to a number of vendors. And he tried to tell them, you need to update your DNS servers. You need to randomize the ports. You need to randomize the IDs better whenever you're doing the transaction IDs with DNS. You need to do this. And a number of the vendors, a large number of the vendors, including some very large telcos, said, we don't patch our systems simply because Dan Kaminsky tells us to. They refused to patch their systems unless an exploit was made available, which it was before he released it in Metasploit, because some people were able to reverse engineer what he was talking about. And then, and only then, they fixed those issues. That's why this scares me. Because this is not something that a lot of standard organizations and testing groups have the capability, the skills, or the legal capability to do, so it just gets ignored. And it's weird, if you look on any nation state action, hot nation state on nation state action, you find out that something like NSO Group is under the hood and they were delivering malware in those situations. If we're not testing for it, we don't fix it. We don't consider it to be a problem. And I think that that's a huge problem that needs to be discussed. How are we going to test these things? Because a lot of the ad networks, if you call them up and say, hey, I want to test for this, they're going to tell you to pound sand. They're just not interested in working with you. And I'm going to talk more about vendors a little bit later. All right, let's talk about mobile. There's some really scary things that are happening in the mobile space for me. This is the same type of thing as the NSO Group, maybe a little bit less so. But if we're looking at mobile, we all have like Android devices or iOS devices. A long time ago, Dan Geer and Bruce Schneier gave a presentation about ecosystems and monolithic ecosystems and the dangers of monolithic ecosystems. And well, Dan got fired from that state because Microsoft was not happy with that presentation. But what happened from that is they were right? This monolithic ecosystem that we have probably wasn't as bad with Microsoft as it is today with iOS and Android, but it's really bad today. And the reason why it bothers me is so much technology today can be hacked with nothing but a kid with a laptop and an obsession. See, a lot of you get obsessed with things and you start picking it apart. You're the hackers in the truest definition of the word. You're picking things apart because you're curious, right? It's like the movie Hackers. What was the motto? It's like their only crime was curiosity. That and breaking into banks. Other than those two things, that was it. That was their only crimes. But the technology is available to you with general purpose computer systems. And that's something Cory Doctorow talked about in a presentation a long time ago. A lot of the vendors are trying to weld the ecosystems shut. Apple wants to weld it shut. We have Microsoft wants to weld it shut as much as they possibly can. And Google with Android absolutely wants to weld it shut. What was it 2 weeks ago? Google was talking about locking sideloading of apps. And of course, their opinion on this as well is going to make things more secure if you can't sideload apps anymore. Just think about how much more secure your environment's going to be. No, it's all about the money. They want the apps to all come through their store. They want you to buy the stuff in their store. They want to have complete control over that ecosystem. So if you're a kid and you want to learn hacking now on mobile, it is not as easy as just downloading some open source projects and playing with those open source projects. Or even with Microsoft, you can download a whole bunch of other stuff through a TechNet subscription, and you can start practicing hacking against those technologies. That is going away. So how many technologies do we rely on absolutely every single day, but it's either impossible or exceedingly difficult, or I'm going to talk about illegal for you to do any hacker level research. And by the way, once again, when I'm talking about hacking, I'm talking about the good definition, the curiosity, take things apart, learn how things work. I'm not talking about the malicious hacking. We'll can differentiate that later with good faith security research. But this is what's missing, and how many things are out there that don't have that level of security and analysis. When we do a lot of analysis with companies, whenever we're doing mobile testing, we do a lot of work to make sure, and we spend a tremendous amount of money to have an environment that we can actually do mobile testing. It is not quick. It is not easy. You have a lot that you have to do to get it up and running. And there's some great products out there like Corellium that help that, but that's not something that's available to that crazy kid in Sweden who's just got a laptop and a dream. And I think that that type of technology, all of this technology should be available for us to have that. And as for the war on general purpose computation, it's over. We lost. Sorry, that's kind of sad. I'm going to try to make it up to you a little bit later. Is that okay? But we lost. We lost because a lot of the standalone technologies that we relied on, like our standalone email servers, which by the way, you shouldn't be running on-prem Exchange, but that's a whole nother conversation. You have all of these different technologies that you could run. You had a wide variety of technologies that you could use, and everything is getting shoved into the cloud vendors again and again and again. You have big three cloud vendors that everybody is using. And I'm going to talk about them here in a couple of minutes as well. So good luck also trying to test personal devices. So tie this with the NSO group thing earlier that I just talked about on the previous slide. If I wanted to actually test delivery of malvertisements to drive malware to somebody's device, the vast majority of mobile devices in corporate America today are owned by the individual. I don't even have permission to do the attacks in those particular scenarios. So here we got these blind spots, folks. And once again, going back to Josh Wright's law, we only fix the things that we can prove can be broken. And there's this assumption that if something has not been broken, then therefore it must be secure. And I think everybody in this room knows that that is not true. The other thing that we don't talk about much is supply chain attacks. And I want to talk about this in terms of the Cisco Raider attack back in 2008, because that was the first experience that I had with supply chain attacks. We got this memo in early 2008 when I was working at Northrop Grumman out in Aurora, Colorado, where the golf balls are, where they flipped out and they told us we had to go through and remove all of the Cisco devices with specific serial numbers from everything. And we spent days crawling around the data centers that we had. And by the way, the data centers were extensive and still are, to try to find every single one of the devices that we had that were from Cisco that had the specific set of serial numbers. What the Cisco Raider attack was a company was creating counterfeit Cisco devices. They were in China, and they were specifically selling it and targeting those devices to Department of Defense. And there was millions and millions of dollars that they made over this. Now, the thing that really bothers me about this particular attack is whenever I read about it, because I was in the classified space when that was happening, when I read about it today, they say, well, there was no evidence of any backdoors or malware that was put in these particular devices. Everything was fine. It was just some people trying to make money. That is not what I heard. On the classified side, they absolutely believed that there were backdoors in these devices. And this was a targeted attack by China going through a third party to try to give Cisco devices to DoD that had these backdoors. Did anybody else deal with the Cisco Raider thing? Anyone else? I got a question. You can shout it out. How accurate were those Cisco devices that you pulled out of an environment? They worked very, very well. The chassis and everything was perfectly matched to a Cisco device. So pretty much. So this got buried under the rug very, very, very quickly, and that made me uncomfortable. Then I'm jumping over a whole bunch of them. Then we get to SolarWinds, right? Talk about the Russians and their capability. And this was a huge news story. I haven't seen a lot of people having good, solid conversations about how to deal with SolarWinds style attacks. I think we spend too much time thinking these things are one-offs, right? We have the Cisco Raider attack, we have the SolarWinds attack, and it's like, oh wow, that's not, we don't have anything that we can have our pen test team do with that, so I guess we're just going to kind of ignore it and hope that somebody higher up the chain is able to actually fix that for us. Okay, then we get to the XZ utilities. XZ utilities was insane. There was a developer on the XZ development team that was submitting updates and patches to XZ to help fix it for 5 years. Then the team realized the contributions from this one person. They made them like a full-on developer that had commit level access so they could push anything they wanted to the utilities. And very quickly after that, they pushed a backdoor to the XZ utilities that if it went out, it would have impacted every single Linux SSH installation across the planet with a remote control backdoor. That's terrifying. Think about the effort that went into that particular attack. That's a tremendous amount of effort to try to exploit some open source library like XKCD talks about, where it's one little component that holds up huge percentages of all the IT infrastructure. And Andreas Strand, we can't have him be our last line of defense. Who is that? That is the guy that caught it less than 24 hours after it got pushed to one of his computer systems. How he detected it was he realized it took a hair longer for him to log into his computer system than the day before. So he started digging, started looking at the code changes, started parsing the code changes. And as smart as he was, he went to some channel, I can't remember, some news channel somewhere, and he said, it looks to me like there's a backdoor in the XZ utilities. Can someone else double check this for me? Because I'm not sure. The first initial responses to him were like, you're insane. Of course there's not a backdoor. What makes you think that there's a backdoor? They would have to exploit and take access to the private keys in order to gain access. But then there were some people that are like, no. This looks to be pre-auth. We missed this by this much being a catastrophic attack against our supply chain. And once again, everyone kind of collectively shrugs their shoulders and then they move on. Then we get to F5. The F5 attack, like this was what? They had been breached F5's networks. They had access to all of their source code and all of their customer databases. This is like an HB Gary level breach since 2023. But it's cool. They came out and they said, well, there's no evidence that they did anything bad. Let me push on that just a little bit. There's no evidence, or you have no evidence that they did anything bad. Those are two different sentences. Anytime I ever hear that, especially whenever you have an organization that has been breached for that long, they didn't have evidence that they were breached since 2023. There's a very good chance that they just didn't have the logging and the telemetry to be able to detect it. So we have these things, we have these patterns, and we don't really talk about it in terms of how do we defend against this. And honestly, I don't have the answer. I think I have part of the answer, but it's not the answer for these things. Go to RSA later, and there's going to be some vendor that has the answer. I can guarantee you, right? I should put that in air quotes for how to deal with that. But the other problem with this is anytime the people in this room start having conversations like, you know what, it's entirely possible that at some point somebody could take a frame laptop computer and then they could take the modules associated for those computers that everyone buys, and we're using those computers and absolutely everything, and they could backdoor those modules. And then anytime anyone puts those modules in, it automatically gives the driver to the frame computer on what the update should be for that module, and then that could be backdoored. They're going to think you're a crazy person, because you probably are, right? But do you think Andreas is normal? How many people do you know that would have that level of curiosity and that level of, not even paranoia, just whatever weird thing ticks in that guy's head to make him go digging into the actual code that was just pushed to his system? We don't have enough people like that. And they can't be our last line of defense. And this kind of leads into extrusion detection. There's a weird thing that happens in your career where you have your heroes. And Richard Bachelek is one of my heroes. I read all of his books. I saw as many presentations of his as I could see. And he was amazing. And this book, Extrusion Detection, for me was life-changing, more than the Tao of information security, because his whole concept was you need to be watching your network for what leaves your network for indications of compromise. And this is one of the key things that Doug Burks, who worked with Richard, had kind of baked into Security Onion and all kinds of stuff. And it's just a fantastic philosophy of constantly hunting what is leaving our environment. Right? And that has driven one of the major products that we give away for free. And we do have a commercial version. I'll talk about it here in a second, where we do use Rita to be able to do this type of analysis. But there's a problem in the last bullet point. Whenever I talk to people about doing extrusion detection, they almost inevitably come to me and say, you know what, man, I just want a tool that automatically detects the attacks and automatically magically stops them. Can we get a tool like that? There's lots of tools like that. They don't work. I mean, they work for like 99% of that time, but that last 1% is a really big 1%, because that's where you're dealing with nation state level attacks. So we have a reseller in Germany. It's formerly known as SAINTCON. They're Algiers. They were doing a demo, proof of concept, and they got packet captures from one of their customers, and they quickly found out that one of their customers had malware on their SolarWinds server. And we were working that, going through it, and it was like, okay, yeah, this is just some malware. Glad you guys caught it. Very cool. They were happy with it. We were happy with it. And about 2 months after that, the big news dropped about SolarWinds, that it was an attack systematically across the infrastructure. But one of the things that was weird about those groups is they loved to dig. They loved doing extrusion detection. They're German. That's kind of how they're wired, right? They love looking at stuff and saying, well, we have this beacon and it's leaving this environment. We have this beacon and it's got jitter of 30%. What legitimate services have jitter of like 20 or 30%? I know like L-Shell, Linode does. There's a couple of others that do to go to services, but they dug and they dug and they dug and they were able to find that malware. Last year, we were at Wild West Hacking Fest, and we got a panicked call from a very large telco provider that wanted to update their license because they found malware on the inside of their network with our thing that was just sitting on the outside of their network, and someone started digging, and they're like, we have malware on the inside of our network. So we run into this problem in this industry, and this is, I don't know, I wish I could blame a generation. I wish I could say it's them damn millennials. They just don't want to learn technology at the core level. But I'm going to be honest with you. It's a lot of us in this room. And I think it's driven by the fact that we're tired, right? We're constantly dealing with attacks. We're constantly dealing with compliance. We're constantly dealing with political bullshit that sucks up 80% of our lives, that we don't have time to sit down and truly dig in to try to understand our technology. And anytime you start asking questions about that, people think you're crazy, right? Like, you're just wasting time. But we don't have time to actually fully understand the technology that we're implementing. And by the way, if you want to do this type of extrusion detection, we have a free tool called Rita. I'm not going to go into it. You can run it at home. You can set it up. We have videos, and you can get it there, activecountermeasures.com, free tools, Rita, as we give away a lot of free stuff, as you're going to find out here in just a little bit. But here we are, we're talking about this stuff, and that also goes back to a lot of our vendors. They aren't really super great at letting us know what they're doing underneath the hood. How many of you just have black magic hand waving from your vendor? Like, oh, we use artificial intelligence. Great. What are your algorithms? Ooh, we can't talk about those algorithms. They're proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms. Bullshit. There's probably like 20, 25 artificial intelligence machine learning algorithms. A lot of them are written in the 60s and 70s. You can tell us, no, we can't talk about that because it's completely proprietary. What I love is going to a conference. We were up at Sector a number of years ago, and I got to hang out with the developers from Darktrace. They had a bunch of developers that were there, and their developers were awesome to talk to. Like, they were talking about the algorithms, the problems, and we were talking about our algorithms. And I remember one of the managers came over and saw the conversation of like geeky Furbies going back and forth. And he's like, this conversation needs to end. Not excited about that, right? We see that a lot from vendors where they don't like to share what they're doing. On the topic of AI, however, and prompts, I want to be completely clear. We desperately need AI. We do. And I'm going to talk about that more on the next slide, but I want to talk about this prompt. This particular prompt said I wanted the Terminator robot dancing with Fred Astaire in a wasteland, and the Terminator robot is saying, I love humans, and Fred Astaire is saying, I love AI, and it gave me this. And you know how ChatGPT asks you questions like, hey, was this useful? I looked at it and I'm like, hey, ChatGPT, you did a great job. Quick question, why does Fred Astaire have 3 arms? I'm not judging. From an artistic perspective, why do you think Fred Astaire needed 3 arms? And it responded back with classic AI mistake. But I got to thinking about your prompt, and Fred Astaire needed to have 2 arms for dancing and a 3rd arm to keep the beat and keep the rhythm. Do you want me to change it? And I said, no, ChatGPT, it's perfect. So that's the one that made it in, right? So let's talk about this complexity and why AI is so incredibly important, right? So back in 2006, I had an engineer from IBM that came into Northrop Grumman, and we were buying it was crazy. They had a product line at the time. It was Federated Identity and Access Management Solution. And it was 3 separate products that you had to buy. They had the Federation, which was weird. They had the identity access and then the identity authorization as 3 separate parts. And you had to put them all together to make them work. And you're like, can I just buy one? They're like, you could, but it ain't going to work. I'm like, why do you sell it as 3 separate parts? At any rate, the PhD from IBM put up this screen and it just had this crazy, complicated, convoluted mess on how this thing worked. And for me as a security engineer, how many of you, when you see flowcharts like this from a technology perspective, like 2 things go through your head? Like, one, a little bit of excitement because now you get to like tear apart those different connections and those links and you get to dig in. And then you get a little bit of dread because you know there's no way you're ever going to be given the time to actually do that. And I remember this guy getting up, and this was an AI prompt that I created, and he puts up this slide and he looks at it and he looks at us and he looks at us and then he says, I think this pretty much is self-explanatory, and just went to the next slide. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Hold on. Back up. I have questions about this, right? I remember I was asking for all the different integrations. I would like to know the APIs. I would like to get the Swagger documentation or the equivalent of Swagger documentation. I would like to know what ports and services it's using. And of course, this is one of those things where the management was like, you need to shut up, dude. It's IBM. They have their shit together. I'm like, oh, never mind that. And I'll just go back to my corner and run Nessus, I guess, right? But I want you to think of the days of just Active Directory, right? Let's take all the cloud crap off the table. I find it very interesting that we still have a good number of our customers that we go in and we test their organization, and they still have rampant Active Directory misconfigurations. Like, if you run Ping Castle against them, it's going to light up and say they have like 2 or 3 criticals before we even get there. And whenever I talk to people about this, just so you know, it's not an issue of they're dumb or they're stupid or any of this stuff, but I've literally had security engineers, when I start asking them these questions, usually one-on-one, break down in tears because they want to do the right thing, right? They find the security vulnerabilities many times before we do, and the organization will not fix it. Systems administrators, management, all of these people, they just kind of say, well, we don't know what the impact that's going to be on operations. We're going to leave it. There's no way a hacker will ever find it. And trust me, the hackers will find it. And that, just a quick sidebar on truth. I want you all to know that one of the things I love about this industry is its truth. You can have arguments about politics. You can have arguments, valid arguments about the trustworthiness of news and various news sources, especially with AI creating fake videos and all of this stuff. You can look at the social media echo chamber trying to fuel you to hate your enemies as much as you possibly can. But one of the things I love about hacking and I love about security is its ground wire truth. The exploit works or the exploit doesn't. The system's secure or the system's not secure. And the attackers will always show us the way. They will show us truth. And I think that's one of the things that we take for granted in this industry, is just how rare it is to be in anything in the world today where there's lots and lots and lots of opinions. You can disagree with me, I can disagree with you, but there's going to be truth, and it's going to be made manifest at some point in the future. And that's just one of the reasons, and I never thought about it until about a week or 2 ago, Wild West Hackin' Fest, that's one of the things I love about this industry, is things are true here. And I love that deeply. All right, so going back to truth and how it applies to things like the problems. We haven't solved all of these problems in Active Directory. And every year we keep layering on greater and greater and greater complexity and new technologies and new services and new cloud providers. And we have people in management positions that go to large conferences like in Vegas with AWS and Vent and all these different things. And they come back and they're like, okay, there's this really cool technology. It's this database and it's in Amazon. We're going to set it up. We're going to put all of our stuff. Are we going to do redundancy and backup? Screw it, dude. It's Amazon. It's never going to go down. We're going to be fine, right? And trust us. It's good, right? And then we are forced to adopt these technologies. How many of you have adopted a technology in your organization over your outright, complete, just disgust for the technology? The guy gets 2 votes because he has 2 arms, right? And it doesn't just happen once in your career. It happens again and again and again and again. And when you ask questions, especially about cloud vendors, they're like, trust us. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. So I want to talk about standardization of mediocrity because this applies to AI. And like I said, by the way, AI is needed for this, right? Because we should be using AI. I think automated pen test is bullshit, right? We cannot automate an effing pen test. I'm going to try not to swear as much. I mean, it's SAINTCON. I'm still going to fucking fail. I'm sorry. But we need AI to help us with this complexity because we have so much stuff that we haven't fixed in existing tech stacks that we need AI for that 80-20 Pareto principle to help us identify and help us deal with the 80% of the garbage we've been dealing with since 2001. Because we need to be focusing on the advanced stuff, the new technologies that are coming up. So while I think a full automated pen test is garbage, boy, those tools to help take that 80% off the table for security testing teams are absolutely powerful tools that we need to be using. Even if they do have us grow a third arm every once in a while, there's power there. Now I want to talk about AI and the standardization of mediocrity, right? So back a long time ago in 2003, when we were doing web application pen tests of Black Hills Information Security, we saw this huge disparity in the overall security quality of web apps, right? We would have a web app on 1 month that would be complete and utter garbage. And then the next month we'd have someone that had all their stuff together. They were doing the right things. They were doing the security plugins and IDEs, but it was very scattered. All right. Something happened. By the way, I totally made up this graph. This is just a scatter plot that I created with AI, and I did a good job of it, but I don't have actual data. This is all on a feeling of me talking to my web app pen testers. Because if you talk to my web app pen testers, they're like, something happened in 2004 early. I can't quite put my finger on it, but we kind of started seeing a lot of the quality of web apps start to cluster and become more and more mediocre. And we now know, of course, that it's AI. It's kind of sad to me, like Stack Overflow. Like, how many of you loved Stack Overflow? I just absolutely loved Stack Overflow. But I got a question. When you went to Stack Overflow, how often did you go through Stack Overflow and it was like garbage, gold, right? And then you would go back the next day, crap. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Crap. I don't even know what they're thinking. And then gold. Stack Overflow, I think that their overall traffic has dropped 90% in the past the past year and a half. That breaks my heart because that was a great place for us to get together and argue and call each other's code crap, I guess, right? But AI sucked all of that down. And remember, AI is truly at its heart a great big plagiarism engine. That's all it is. I'm going to get applause on that. Okay. And when you look at it as a plagiarism engine, it sucked down all of that code, the good code and the bad code and the mediocre code, and it homogenizes it to the mediocre code that we're starting to see in apps today. This isn't a good thing, by the way. The web app testers are like, we have to try a little bit, but we're starting to find like criticals that we haven't found in a long time. And the worst thing about it, and this is one of the reasons why we're sure what's actually happening, is when we talk to the developers, especially when we're talking about business logic errors, we're running into developers now that are like, I don't know. You're like, what? You committed this code. Like, yeah, we're using AI to help us speed up the development process to get products out faster. And I just basically took the code that I got from Claude and I put it in and the test case passed and I moved on to the next thing. Would anybody know? Probably not. The people that would have known, we fired them. This is what's happening. We aren't using AI to make us better and deal with the hyper complex, almost infinitely scaling problem of computer security. Everyone's looking at AI as a way to reduce the head count of security teams. Which, sidebar, a lot of people don't like us. Be nice to people, okay? I know sometimes we can be a bit grumpy and rough. We shouldn't be grumpy and rough, right? Mainly because we don't want to get fired. But we need to be kind of those standard bearers. So things are going to go to hell very, very quickly. And we have to be ready for that because it is coming. All right. I want to talk about vendor forever days a little bit. So one of the, I work with, like, I want to make it clear that what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about some of my sister pen testing companies. When I die, like, there's things that I'm going to be very proud of. I'm going to be proud of my children. I'm going to be proud of the life that my wife and I have lived. I'm going to be proud of a lot of things, BHIS, like a lot of that, right? One of the things though that I'm going to be very proud of is my competitors are my best friends. Like I talk with Dave Kennedy all the time, and not as much as I should, but we're really like, you know, if you're looking at like Kevin Johnson, Dave Kennedy, Tim Medine, like a lot of these people in this industry, the other people can't have these conversations because they're not small InfoSec business owners. And I think it's amazing to me how we have this very tight-knit group, and we used to meet every month and talk about the problems that we were encountering. We're competing with each other, and yet there's also times where we're sitting and we're celebrating with each other. We're invited to each other's weddings. We cry with each other. And that's something that's very precious to me. I don't look at my competitors and say, you know what? I wouldn't piss on them if they were on fire. That's amazing. So when I'm talking about this, I want to make it clear I'm not talking with a lot of the sister organizations we do work with at Trusted Sec and Red Siege and Secure IDs and stuff. But our stance on vendor disclosure is it sucks. Like, if we work with a vendor to coordinate some type of vulnerability that we've discovered in a pen test, that usually goes like this, and I'm talking like in a specific example with Oracle, where we find a vulnerability, an actual like SQL injection vulnerability in one of their products. We send it to them. We get a nasty email back from them saying, there's no way, we have a top-notch red team. There's no way that you found this particular vulnerability. You're going to need to send us more data. And like I sent you packet captures, screenshots, step-by-step instructions on how to replicate it. Okay, here's a burp state file on how to do it. We're going to need more data. We're going to need more data. We're going to need more data. With Oracle, I actually had to say, great, if you don't consider this to be a security vulnerability, we're going to do a webcast on it next week. And all of a sudden, someone calls me. I don't do this because the amount of overhead for BHIS is ridiculous and we lose money on it. So we give it to our customers. The customers can deal with it because they have more leverage with the vendors than we do, right? So that's my stance on it, right? And it's just an incredible pain in the ass. If you're looking at Google, we came up with the calendar injection vulnerability that a bunch of people got hit with a long time ago. And we tried to coordinate with Google for like a year with Bo Bullock and Mike. They were going through and they're like, this is a bad vulnerability. We can literally just add things to people's calendars and bypass all your spear phishing mechanisms. We can DDoS entire organizations and they can't recover unless they basically call you. And Google just responded back with, we don't consider this to be a bug. We consider this to be a feature. What? I will give Google credit though. When it finally hit the news, and it was like, I think it was in like Forbes or something, Google gave Mike Felch, who wrote up the disclosure and sent it in, they sent him a check for, was it $1,337? And they said, good job on the bug bounty and a Google shirt. I'm like, oh, right. Microsoft is worse because they don't give us t-shirts. We have a number of vulnerabilities that we've given to Microsoft and they either don't respond or they respond back. Once again, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And we just continue using them. And I think for a lot of the vulnerabilities that we've discovered when we're working with very, very large vendors, they kind of have an attitude of this isn't a Metasploitable module. If it's not something that's in Metasploit, I don't care. They're more complicated. And cloud stuff is very difficult to get into Metasploit, which is one of the reasons why we created Graph Runner, if you want to check it out from Daft Hack. I do want to talk a little bit about a terrifying call that I had yesterday, and I'm not going to say who it's with, what state, where it's at, but it's a vendor that is doing services for the United States government. And they do services for some of the most disadvantaged people in the United States of America. And one of the best hackers I have ever worked with, bar none in the universe, has been working with the state, and he has found a vulnerability that he believes he has found somewhere in the vicinity between $24 million to $89 million of fraud. And that's fraud. That's tax dollars from all of us in this room. And he believes it's probably, since this is used by a number of different states, he believes the dollar amount's going to be up above $1 billion when it's done. And he's been trying to work with this vendor, and hearing the story of this vendor, they're like, well, we hired the pen testing firm from the company that does our EDR, and the pen testing firm that works with our EDR company, they said we're good and we're as secure as we possibly can be because we're running their product. The vendor refuses to acknowledge the very detailed evidence that he is giving them about this particular security vulnerability. And what's worse is when he brings it to the FBI says that's not big enough for us to deal with at the moment. I hope to God that there's an FBI agent in this room that's hearing this. It's like, I would like to hear some more information about this, and I would like to get on a call with these people and maybe have a conversation. That would be pretty fantastic. It's kind of an inverse spot the Fed. It's like, I actually want to find the Fed. No. I want to have a talk. But there are going to be conversations. I haven't had a chance to talk to some of the people that I know. But working with vendors is various shades of bad because they do not care. They just do not care. And that's sad. So what are we to do about it? Turns out, the Department of Justice, this was something that came out in the Capital One breach. Erratic did that attack. And I was actually on that case as an expert witness. And the Department of Justice, as part of that case, they developed a new policy of good faith security research. So if you want to do security research and cloud vendors and all of these different things, you can do it. You're not completely locked out from doing any security research whatsoever as security professionals against a lot of these different cloud vendors and vendors that are out there. You can, but I want you to read this document to understand where the boundaries are. Like, if you go out and you start exploiting it to make money, you're no longer in good faith security research. If you go out and you immediately post it and you don't ever talk to the vendor whatsoever, you're not in good faith security research. So I'm encouraging you all to do what dual core toils to do, which is hack all the things. Because we need to be hacking all the things. Because trust me, things are only fragile until they break. And then they get better. And it's so essential to all of us to be out there trying to break as many things as we possibly can. Because we are the structural engineers for IT. I want to leave with the silver lining, though. We live in the golden age of education and IT security. We really, really, really do. And one of the things I think that has brought us into the golden age of security is the end of cash cow training. This is my prompt from earlier. I think it nailed it, y'all. I think it nailed it. Things got out of hand, and I was definitely part of the problem. And when you look at it, I want to make it very clear, without really shitting on one specific organization or another, you cannot be a patriotic company and have a 90% profit margin on government contracts. I remember, no, this isn't the training organization you think it is, but I remember going to Fort Gordon, and I was teaching out there, and another training group that wasn't the one I was associated with. All of the instructors showed up in like Maseratis and kind of lower end Lamborghinis, which is still ridiculously expensive. And I just remember thinking, like, what a shitty look. Like, you show up to your government DoD training in a supercar. Like, what kind of message does that send to your students? The people that are going to be on the front lines, the people that are trying to defend our infrastructure in uniform, and you're showing up just basically advertising that you're fleecing them and us and the United States government for a lot of money. That's just crap. I also had a chat with an EU salesperson for a training organization a long time ago. And up until that particular point, they tried to not do any training that could be attended by people from China or Russia. And their take on that was they didn't want to enable the enemy to be able to hack our networks. And that whole policy went away in that organization. And another one of the instructors that I used to teach with had the same conversation with the same person. And he said, dude, it's great. We teach the defenders how to defend, and we teach the attackers how to attack. And no matter what, we make money. Felt a little sick right here, right? By the way, it's gone and it won't be missed. Now, the reason why we're in the golden age is because of people like this, and this is not an all-inclusive list. These people are heroes, right? You got John Hammond. Is John gone already, or is he coming up later? He already went? He did. John is amazing. Like I have conversations with John where I feel like he's on the verge of a mental breakdown because he has a full-time job and he's kicking out these training videos at a crazy quality at an insanely high clip. And then I remember that he's still in his 20s and I'm like, oh yeah, he'll be fine. Kevin Johnson, whenever he came to Anti-Siphon, he wants to do pay what you can stuff. Tanya, she just got the Rito Award at Wild West Hacking Fest. These people up here, this is not all inclusive. These people are amazing heroes and they're putting this stuff out every single day to train us. And if you have conversations with a lot of these people, they do it for a number of reasons, right? They do it just because of the drive. They do it because of trying to help people. Trust me, they don't make as much money as you think they make. Okay. Just going to put that out there. And, one of the things that drives them is an absolute fear. With all the shit that I talked about, they're afraid of those same things and they're pushing as hard as they can to try to make things better. And as far as us and like what we've done is this whole concept of pay what you can training has been just this fundamental shift for me as a human being. I remember when COVID hit, we started having conversations about how we could get more people that are disadvantaged in computer security. And I remember the conversation initially was like, do we have scholarships for a specific ethnic group? Do we have scholarships for women? Do we have that? And I want you guys to stick with me. Please, please, please don't put your fists up yet, but listen to me. I hate that. Now, I want to be very clear. Every organization that does scholarships, their heart's in the right place. And I know that for the people that receive these scholarships, it changes their lives. And those two things are wonderful. And that's not why I hate them. Why I hate them is because things like scholarships for different socioeconomic groups doesn't change the game, doesn't change anything. And we wanted to change the game. We wanted to fundamentally change it in such a way that the biggest barrier that anyone has, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, geographic location, is money. What happens when we take money out of the equation completely? There's no concept of scholarships. Just come as you are. I don't care. Just come hack with us. And when it first happened, the first class that we did during COVID, it was overwhelming. We had 7,000 people take our training. We broke the webinar platform that we were on. Just shattered it. And when it comes to like the money part of it, because I had people that are like, if you do pay what you can and you make $0 an option, you're not going to make any money. And that first conference that we did where I did pay what you can, I made as much in that 1-2-day class from training instructor fees as I did an entire year with the SANS Institute. There's money to be made doing the right thing. There's money to be made in caring. And more important than money to be made, we run into people all the time that come up to us at conferences. And like, like a huge percentage of people are moms that were working. They were stay-at-home moms. Their kids are all out of the house. They wanted to get into something and they were able to get into security because of our training. I have people that were working 2 to 3 jobs and somebody told them, hey, you should check out this training. And they spent their weekends or whatever little time they had taking the recordings and going through it and getting into computer security. I don't know what happened, but we have a whole bunch of truckers. Apparently, what the hell? They're here? You mother truckers, you're following me everywhere. But I think a lot of it has to do with they have a lot of time driving, they can listen and they can do this stuff and they want to improve. And that's great because that whole career field is about to go completely to dust, right? And there's nothing better to me than having someone come up to me at a conference like this one and say, I got into computer security because you're training. I got a job because I took your training and they covered my cost to come here to this conference. And I'm like, it's okay. It's like that for all of us. Welcome. Oh, wait, there is something better than that. I had a mom, God damn it, I wasn't going to cry. I had a mom at one conference that came up to me and she said, I wanted you to know that I got a job in computer security because I took all of your classes and I put it on my resume, and that got me the interview. And then I was able to do the interview because of the training and the classes. And right after I got hired, my kid had cancer, came up with cancer, was diagnosed. And I was like, holy shit, are they okay? She's like, it's fine. It's fine. It was operable. We were able to deal with it, but we had health insurance to get us through that. All because we tried to get away from like a 98% profit margin, just helping people. So we can do this in this community. And that's, talking about it, you guys, like, talking about this conference, right? You go to these conferences, some of them, and you have people helping each other learn how to solder. And it usually goes like this. Damn it! Yeah, don't do that. That's the hot end. They're helping them pick locks. They're helping them, break into things. The people that were over here, they were talking about the CTF before we got started, talking and helping each other through the CTF. God damn it. This community has come such a long way from its origins. This is a beautiful place, and we're here to help each other. And I just want to continue to say, just come hack with us. By the way, I've got some things for you. All right. So up here on the slide, I have a link to a whole bunch of free labs. It's 16 hours of lab environments and probably about 30 different labs. And I can show you those labs here in just a couple of seconds. But I'm going to leave this up, take a picture, sign up. Now, when you sign up, I'm going to be honest, it sounds a bit skeevy, but talk to your friends and the people in the community. We try our best not to be skeevy. It's not required. It's purely optional. But if you want to give us your address, you can. All right. And if you give us your address, we send you really cool comics like The Future Is. We'll send you really cool zines with detailed, cool articles about how to break into stuff. And the thing that I'm going to give to SAINTCON is everything I have left I have Backdoors and Breaches. How many of you have heard of or played Backdoors and Breaches? Awesome. This is special. This is version 3, which goes with this competitive version. I've been talking about it for a while. This turns Backdoors and Breaches into a competitive game like Magic the Gathering or Dominion, where you can play with up to 4 friends attacking and defending your network. So this is finally released at Wild West Hacking Fest. I have about 300 of them left. We went through 1,000 at Wild West Hacking Fest. This is not released. It says prototype on the bottom. And if you don't get it right away, that means we went through the first 300 that we had left very, very, very quickly. And we're going to have to print out some new ones, but I'll give you guys the prototype for free as well as a way of saying thank you for coming to my talk as part of this. And by the way, thanks. And I think we're going to make this into a men's and women's shirt. Advertising our training, it says, "Don't touch grass, touch me instead." That was a pretty good prompt. So once again, I just want to say thank you. This has been, for my wife and I, this has been a really cool stop. We've been on the road pretty much nonstop for the past, I think, month and a half. Is that right? Pretty close. I think we've only spent like 4 or 5 days at home, probably over the last 60 to 70 days, and we won't be home until Christmas. So this was an absolutely super cool stop. I love the vibe of this conference. And please, for the love of God and all that's holy in this world, get back to work and protecting the networks in Salt Lake and Provo. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great conference.